Part 2. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Lars couldn't tell. The storm raged on, the sea swallowing the boat in waves of fury. The Kraken's tentacles were everywhere, grabbing, thrashing, pulling them toward the depths of the ocean. Yet somehow, Lars and Svein managed to keep the boat moving, narrowly dodging the creature's strikes. It seemed as though the Kraken had become relentless in its pursuit. Every time they thought they had escaped, another tentacle would shoot forward, slamming into the boat, forcing them to steer wildly to avoid being captured. Lars gripped the wheel with all the strength left in his hands, eyes squinting against the spray of salt water that stung his face. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of the madness of the situation. "We need to go further, Svein," he shouted over the roar of the storm. "We can't stay close to it. It's too dangerous." Svein, drenched and pale, nodded, but there was an unmistakable fear in his eyes. They had gone further into the open ocean than either of them had planned, and now they were running low on fuel. They had no more harpoons left, no more weapons, just the engine and their will to survive. But suddenly, amidst the crashing waves and the Kraken's enraged growls, the creature paused. Its tentacles retracted slightly, as though it had become aware of something else in the distance. Lars and Svein didn't wait to question it. "Now!" Lars screamed, turning the wheel sharply. The boat sped forward, cutting through the waves with newfound speed, as if the Kraken's attention had shifted, even if only momentarily. Svein pushed the throttle to its maximum, the engine roaring louder, but it wasn't long before the Kraken's attention returned. Its massive form loomed behind them, but now it seemed hesitant, almost as if it was unsure of its next move. The tension was unbearable, every second stretching out, but something strange was happening. The Kraken, though massive and terrifying, wasn't attacking as ferociously anymore. Lars glanced at Svein, his eyes full of disbelief. Could it be? Then, without warning, the creature let out a chilling, guttural cry and retreated. Slowly, its immense body slipped back beneath the waves, its tentacles retracting like coiling serpents. Lars didn't hesitate. He pushed the boat harder, leaning into the wind as the Kraken finally disappeared into the abyss below. He didn't know why it had backed off, and he didn't care to question it. All that mattered was that they were alive and free, for the moment. Minutes later, the storm began to subside. The wind slowed, the waves calmed, and the sky began to clear. Lars and Svein looked at each other in disbelief, both soaked to the bone and exhausted, but grateful to still be alive. We made it," Svein whispered, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and shock. Lars nodded, but there was no relief in his eyes, only wariness. "We made it," he repeated, but deep down he knew this wasn't over. The Kraken was still out there, and somehow he knew they hadn't seen the last of it. They continued to motor through the now smooth waters, the island from earlier fading into the distance. But their thoughts were heavy, consumed with what had just happened, and what might still happen. As they sailed toward the horizon, they could only wonder, had they truly escaped, or was this just the calm before the storm? The boat rocked gently on the calm waters as Lars and Svein sat quietly, their eyes fixed on the horizon. The storm had passed, leaving a haunting stillness in its wake. The terrifying encounter with the Kraken still felt surreal, like a nightmare that hadn't quite let go of its grip on them. They had survived, but just barely. And as they looked out over the water, they couldn't shake the sense that something was still lurking beneath the surface, waiting, watching. "We need to head home," Lars finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "We've been out here long enough. The Kraken, it's not something we can just leave behind." Svein nodded silently. His face was pale, his mind still racing with images of the creature's massive tentacles wrapping around the boat. He couldn't erase the memory of its eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, watching them, stalking them through the storm. "I never believed Henrik," Svein muttered as if speaking to himself. But he was right. It was real. It was all real. Lars remained silent, staring out at the endless expanse of ocean. He couldn't bring himself to argue. Svein was right. What they had seen, what they had survived, was real. There was no denying it now. Henrik, their friend who had told the tale of the Kraken in drunken jest, had spoken the truth all along. The journey back to shore was long and exhausting. They had no clear direction anymore, no landmarks to guide them. The vastness of the ocean seemed endless, and even though the storm had passed, there was still an unsettling sense of unease. Every wave, every gust of wind made them think that maybe the Kraken hadn't let them go after all. By the time they reached the shore, it was already late in the evening. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of red and orange. The small fishing village was quiet, its familiar sights almost unrecognizable after the chaos of the open sea. They made their way to the dock, each step feeling heavier than the last. There was a strange, almost oppressive weight on them now. A weight that came with knowing they had seen something that defied all reason and understanding. The Kraken wasn't just a myth anymore. It was a reality that haunted them both. They reached the bar without saying much more. The wooden door creaked as they entered, the familiar warmth of the place a small comfort after the freezing cold of the sea. The usual patrons were scattered around the room, drinking and chatting, their voices low and muffled in the background. Lars and Svein made their way to their usual corner, taking their seats. The barman, an old acquaintance, gave them a nod of acknowledgement but didn't ask any questions. The bar was quiet, and Lars felt an uncomfortable stillness in the air. Svein stared into his glass, his fingers tapping absently on the table. "What are we going to do now, Lars?" he asked, his voice heavy with the weight of their experience. Lars ran a hand through his hair, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe we just move on. Maybe we just forget about it." But as he said those words, he realized that he couldn't. They had seen the Kraken. They had been in its presence, and nothing would ever erase that. No matter how hard they tried to forget, the memory of those massive tentacles, the roar of the storm, and the glowing eyes would haunt them forever. Conversation with Henrik came flooding back. He had warned them, told them that the Kraken was real. But they had laughed it off, thought it was just a crazy story. Now, sitting in the dim light of the bar, Lars realized just how wrong they had been. "Do you think it will come back?" Svein asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lars looked at his friend, the question hanging in the air like an unspeakable truth. He didn't know the answer. Could they ever escape it? Could they ever truly leave the Kraken behind? "I don't know," Lars finally replied, his voice quiet and distant. "But I don't think we'll ever be the same again." The two men sat in silence, the weight of their experience pressing down on them. The Kraken, the storm, the terror, they would carry it with them for the rest of their lives. And as they sat there in that quiet bar, they knew that no one would ever believe their story. No one would ever understand what they had seen, what they had survived. But they knew the truth. And that was enough. The following days in the village were a blur of quiet reflection and unease. Lars and Svein couldn't bring themselves to tell anyone what had happened out there in the open sea. How could they? Even though they had seen the Kraken with their own eyes, they knew the moment they spoke about it, they would be treated as crazy, just like everyone had treated Henrik. The two of them had returned to their normal lives as best they could. But the weight of their experience hung over them like a storm cloud that never quite dissipated. They avoided the usual spots where fishermen gathered to share their tales, wary of the questions they might be asked. The villagers had noticed their absence. They hadn't been around for a while, and it hadn't gone unnoticed. People had started to talk, quietly at first, behind Lars and Svein's backs. They were back from their trip, but the two of them weren't acting like themselves. They were withdrawn, distant, as though something had broken inside of them. At the local bar, the barman offered them both a drink without asking, understanding that the usual cheerfulness of the two friends had faded into something darker. The familiar chatter and laughter of the bar didn't feel as comforting as it used to. Lars and Svein didn't say much. They hadn't spoken of the Kraken to anyone, but the tension between them and the townsfolk was palpable. Even Henrik, who had once drunkenly spun tales of the creature, had become more of an enigma in their minds. Had he known all along? Did he understand the gravity of what he was saying? One evening, as they sat together, nursing their drinks, Lars finally broke the silence. "Do you think anyone would believe us if we told them what happened?" he asked, not looking at Svein. Svein shook his head. "No, no one would. We barely believe it ourselves." Lars glanced up at the worn wooden beams above the bar. "But it was real, wasn't it?" Svine's voice was low, as though the very act of acknowledging it out loud made the whole thing feel even more tangible. It was real. It's like something out of a nightmare. But we saw it. We were there. Neither of them spoke for a while, both men lost in the haunting memories of the creature beneath the water. The images were seared into their minds, the tentacles, the eyes, the way the ocean had seemed to boil with rage. I keep wondering why we survived, Lars muttered. I don't know what kept it from finishing us off. Svine's response was quieter, almost hesitant. Maybe it just wanted to let us know it was there, to remind us that it exists, to remind us that there are things out there in the deep we'll never fully understand. Lars took a long gulp from his glass. I hope that's all it wanted, but part of me wonders if it's still out there. Svine didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared down into his drink, swirling it absent-mindedly. Maybe, but even if it is, I don't think we'll ever go looking for it again. Lars chuckled darkly, the sound hollow. I don't think I'll ever look at the ocean the same way again. They sat in silence for a while longer, lost in the oppressive quiet that seemed to surround them. The bar was quieter than usual, and the usual background chatter of other fishermen had faded away. Everyone knew that Lars and Svine had returned from their trip, but none of them dared to ask what had happened. The village was used to strange stories, but some things, some creatures, were best left unspoken. As the night wore on, Lars and Svine paid their tab and left the bar. They walked down the quiet streets of the village, the weight of their encounter still pressing on their shoulders. The air was cool, and the sea breeze carried a salty scent that seemed to cling to everything, reminding them of the vastness of the ocean they had just barely escaped. They didn't say much as they walked back to their small homes, the sounds of the village drifting away behind them. The Kraken was no longer just a myth. It was a truth they carried with them, one they couldn't shake, no matter how hard they tried. And as they lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling in the dark, one thing was certain. Their lives would never be the same again. The Kraken was real, and it would always be there, waiting beneath the waves. The following morning, Lars and Svine had hoped to slip back into their routines unnoticed, but the sight of their battered boat made that impossible. As they walked down the village's narrow main street, they saw a small crowd gathering by the docks. The villagers, curious as ever, had noticed the damage to the boat right away. It was hard to ignore. The once sturdy vessel now looked like it had been through hell, its wood splintered, its sides battered and scarred. "Is this your boat?" someone called out as Lars and Svein approached. It was Olav, a fisherman known for his sharp eye and quick questions. Lars and Svein exchanged a glance, both of them suddenly feeling the weight of the past few days settle onto their shoulders. They hadn't spoken to anyone about what had happened at sea, and they certainly weren't eager to recount the horrors they'd encountered. "Yeah," Lars said, trying to sound casual. "Just a rough trip, nothing special." Olav looked at the boat again, his brow furrowed. "A rough trip? You don't get damage like that from a normal storm, my friends. That's not just the wind and waves." Svein shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing for something to say. "We got caught in a bad storm. We made it to an island to wait it out. That's all." Olav wasn't buying it. "A storm that bad, huh? You're lucky to be alive." Lars forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, we were lucky." "Where did you end up?" Olav pressed, glancing at the small group of people that had started to gather. "You were gone for quite a while." The last thing Lars and Svein wanted was to talk about the island, the dark, ominous waters, or the creature that had almost claimed their lives. They exchanged another silent look, both of them wondering how much they should share. "We ended up on a small island," Svein said, his voice flat, "just until the storm passed." "On an island? And the boat ends up like this?" Olav persisted. "Was the storm really that bad, or is there something you're not telling us?" Lars's patience was starting to wear thin. "It was bad enough," he snapped, trying to keep his temper in check. "We don't need to explain every detail." But that only seemed to draw more attention, and soon others in the crowd were asking their own questions. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Who had seen the storm? What had they done to end up with such damage? Svein stepped forward, trying to shut down the conversation before it spiraled. "We don't want to talk about it," he said, his voice firm. "It's over. We survived. That's all that matters. But the crowd wasn't satisfied. They had their suspicions. The boat was a mess, and the two friends were acting strange. The villagers weren't fools. They had seen too many strange things in the world of the sea to ignore the obvious. "Come on, Svein, Lars," Olav said, a smile creeping into his face. "We're fishermen here. We know what it looks like when someone's hiding something. You've been gone for days, your boat's wrecked, and you don't want to talk about it? You're telling us it was just a storm?" Lars clenched his fists. He could feel the pressure mounting, the need to keep the truth hidden becoming harder to manage. They had only been gone for a few days. But already the villagers were poking at the edges of their story, looking for cracks, looking for something more. "We don't have time for this," Lars said, his voice low and dangerous. "We've been through enough. So if you want to gossip, do it somewhere else." The crowd fell silent. Olav stared at Lars for a moment, clearly taken aback by the intensity in his voice. He looked over at the rest of the villagers, who seemed unsure of how to proceed. It was clear they weren't getting the answers they wanted. Finally, Olav threw his hands up in defeat. "Fine," he said, his voice carrying a note of resignation. "Keep your secrets. But I'm telling you, there's more to this story, and one day the truth will come out." The crowd slowly dispersed, the whispers and murmurs continuing among the villagers. Lars and Svein watched them go, the uneasy silence settling back in. "That was close," Svein muttered, wiping his brow as the weight of their encounter with the Kraken continued to hang heavy between them. Lars nodded grimly. "Too close. They'll be talking about us for weeks." But the truth was, Lars didn't care what the villagers thought anymore. They could gossip all they wanted. The Kraken was real, and they had seen it. Nothing anyone said would change that. As the crowd dissipated, Lars and Svein turned away from the docks, heading back to their homes. But they both knew that the questions from the villagers would only grow louder. The village was beginning to sense that something wasn't right. And Lars and Svein couldn't hide the truth forever. The Kraken wasn't just a myth anymore. It was a part of their lives, a part of the sea, a part of their very existence. And no matter how hard they tried to forget, it would follow them for the rest of their days. The morning sun cast long shadows over the quiet fishing village as Lars and Svein made their way to the docks. The night had been restless, their minds filled with flashes of the Kraken's enormous limbs and the eerie silence that had followed its retreat into the depths. No matter how much they tried to convince themselves that they had survived, that it was over, the weight of their encounter clung to them like a curse. And there was only one man they could talk to about it. Henrik. They found him where he always was in the early hours, sitting at his favorite table outside the village's small seaside cafe, nursing a cup of black coffee. His rugged face, worn by years of battling the sea, was unreadable as he gazed out at the horizon. He didn't acknowledge them as they approached, but Lars and Svein knew he had seen them. Wordlessly, they sat down across from him. Henrik finally turned his gaze toward them, his eyes sharp. "You two look like hell." Lars exhaled heavily. "We've been through hell." Henrik raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting. Svein leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You weren't lying." Henrik's expression didn't change, but a flicker of understanding passed through his eyes. He set his coffee cup down slowly. "I know." Lars ran a hand through his hair, still struggling to put everything into words. "We went out there. We went looking for it. We didn't believe you. We thought it was just another fisherman's tale, just another drunken story in the bar." He shook his head. "But we were wrong." A long silence followed. The waves lapped gently against the shore, a stark contrast to the chaos they had witnessed at sea. Henrik sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Tell me." Svein swallowed hard before speaking. "We got caught in a storm. Twice. The second one pushed us to an island. That's where it found us." His voice trembled slightly, and he clenched his hands into fists. It was massive, unbelievably massive. It was watching us, playing with us like we were nothing. And then it let us go. Henrik remained quiet, studying their faces. Finally, he nodded. "Now you understand." Lars slammed his fist on the table, his frustration boiling over. "Understand? Understand what, Henrik? That something out there shouldn't exist? That we're not the ones in control when we're out at sea?" His voice was bitter. "You could have told us how terrifying it really was." Henrik gave a small, humorless chuckle. And you would have believed me? Neither of them answered. Henrik continued, his voice low and steady. The Kraken doesn't need to kill. It doesn't need to sink every ship it sees. It knows what it is. It knows it's beyond us. Sometimes it reminds us. He picked up his coffee and took a sip. You're lucky it let you live. Lars and Svein exchanged glances, the weight of Henrik's words sinking in. Svein finally spoke. Why did it let us go? Henrik shrugged. Maybe it was curious. Maybe it was amused. Maybe it didn't see you as a threat. His expression darkened. Or maybe it wanted to make sure you'd spread the story. Lars narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Henrik met his gaze. The Kraken has been part of seafaring legends for centuries. People have stopped believing. Maybe it doesn't like that. He leaned forward slightly. Now you're believers, and you'll make others believe too, whether you want to or not. A chill ran down Svein's spine. Lars scoffed, shaking his head. No one's going to believe us. Henrik smirked. They don't have to. He gestured at them. Look at you, shaken, changed. People will notice. You might not say anything, but the way you act will tell them everything. Silence fell between them again. Finally, Henrik stood up, stretching his arms. You did what no sane man would do. You went looking for the Kraken and found it. But I'll give you one piece of advice. He leaned down, his voice serious. Forget about it. Lars frowned. How can we forget? Henrik's gaze was cold. Because the more you think about it, the more it lingers in your mind. And the more it lingers, the more it calls you back. With that, Henrik walked away, leaving Lars and Svein sitting in the morning sun, their world forever changed. Lars and Svein sat in silence, watching Henrik disappear into the streets of the village. His words hung heavy in the air, like the last remnants of a storm that had passed but still left the scent of rain behind. Svein finally exhaled, rubbing his temples. Forget about it? He scoffed. How the hell are we supposed to forget? Lars leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He knew we wouldn't. That's the point. He shook his head. The way he talked about it, it's like he understands something we don't. Like he's been living with this knowledge for years. Svein frowned, staring at the wooden table between them. You think he's seen it more than once? Lars hesitated before answering. I don't know, but I do know he wasn't surprised. He didn't react the way people do when they hear an impossible story. He knew exactly what we went through. Svein leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. He said the Kraken let us live, that it wanted us to spread the story. He shivered. Do you think that's true? Lars thought about the way the creature had loomed over them. Its eyes, if those even were eyes, locked onto them with a strange intelligence. It had played with them, tested them, and then it had simply let them go. I don't know what to think anymore, Lars admitted. But Henrik's right about one thing. People will notice. We're not the same as we were when we left. Svein sighed. We can't tell them the truth. Lars smirked bitterly. Oh, you think they'd believe us? Svein let out a humorless chuckle. No, they'd think we were drunk or out of our minds. His smile faded. But Henrik said something else, that the more we think about it, the more it calls us back. A cold feeling settled over them. Lars rubbed his hands together, trying to shake the chill. Do you believe that? Svein hesitated. I don't know. But if he's right, then what happens next? Neither of them had an answer. The village was quiet around them, the smell of salt water and fresh fish drifting through the air. It was a normal day, a peaceful day. And yet, for Lars and Svein, it felt as if something unseen was still lurking beneath the surface of their reality, waiting. Svein finally stood up. Let's go. We need a drink. Lars nodded, pushing himself up from the chair. Yeah, and maybe after that, we'll figure out what the hell we do next. But even as they walked toward the bar, neither of them could shake the feeling that Henrik was right. They had found the Kraken. And somehow, it wasn't done with them yet. The bar was dimly lit, filled with the scent of aged wood and seawater. Familiar faces surrounded Lars and Svein, villagers who had known them since childhood. Some of them had already heard rumors about their disastrous fishing trip, though none knew the truth. As they sat at their usual corner table with glasses of dark ale, Svein kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting Henrik to return. You keep looking for him? Lars said, taking a sip. Svein shook his head. No, I keep thinking about what he said. He leaned in, lowering his voice. You ever wonder if he's hiding something? Not just about what he saw before, but about the Kraken itself? Lars exhaled through his nose. He sounded like he understood it in a way we don't. And he wasn't afraid. Not like we were. Svein drummed his fingers on the table, deep in thought. What if he's seen more than just the Kraken? What if he knows something about why it let us go? Before Lars could answer, one of the older fishermen, Eriksson, pulled up a chair beside them. He was a weathered man in his 60s, known for telling long tales about the sea. He eyed them both with interest. "Heard you boys ran into trouble out there," Eriksson said, swirling the ale in his mug. Lars and Svein exchanged a glance. "Bad storm," Lars replied carefully. Eriksson chuckled. "A storm, eh? That why your boat came back looking like it got caught in the jaws of something?" Svein stiffened. "What are you getting at?" The old fisherman leaned in, lowering his voice. "There are stories, you know, about the deep, things that only show themselves to those foolish enough to go looking." He smirked. "And from what I hear, you two went looking." Lars kept his face unreadable. "We were just fishing." Eriksson chuckled again, but his eyes held something sharper beneath the amusement. "You ever wonder why some stories get passed down while others disappear? Some things don't want to be found, boys." He tapped the table with his knuckles and stood. "Just some advice. Let sleeping beasts lie." As he walked away, Lars and Svein sat in silence, his words echoing in their minds. Svein clenched his jaw. "You think he knows?" Lars exhaled. "I think he suspects." Svein took a long drink and set his glass down. "We should leave it alone, right?" Lars nodded slowly. "Yeah, we should." But as they sat there, neither of them could shake the same thought. It wasn't over. The night was still as Lars and Svein walked through the quiet village, the conversation with Eriksson lingering between them like a fog. The stars shimmered above the dark sea, their reflections flickering in the rippling water. They had agreed to meet Henrik outside the docks, away from the ears of curious villagers. When they arrived, he was already there, sitting on a wooden crate, gazing at the horizon. His expression was unreadable. "You came," Henrik said, his voice calm but knowing. "Of course we did," Svein replied, folding his arms. "We need answers." Henrik sighed and nodded. "I figured you'd want them." He looked between them, his face shadowed under the dim glow of a dock lantern. "But the real question is, do you really want to know?" Lars clenched his jaw. "We saw it, Henrik. We barely made it back. You said something before we left, that it would call us back if we kept thinking about it." Henrik exhaled, rubbing his hands together. "It will," Svein scoffed. "That's ridiculous." Henrik's eyes darkened. "Is it?" He stood and took a step closer. "Tell me, since you returned, have you felt normal? Have you slept peacefully? Have you gone a day without thinking about it?" Lars and Svein exchanged glances. Neither of them spoke. Henrik nodded knowingly. "That's how it starts," he pointed toward the sea. "It doesn't need to chase you. It doesn't need to appear in your nightmares. It just needs you to remember." A shiver ran down Lars's spine. Svein shook his head. "You're saying, what? That just by thinking about it, we're letting it in?" Henrik gave a humorless smile. "You don't understand yet, but you will." Lars took a slow breath. "Then what are we supposed to do? Forget?" Henrik's expression was unreadable. "Can you?" Neither of them answered. The waves lapped gently against the docks. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and decay. For the first time, Svein felt something deeper than fear, something that unsettled him to his core. Because the truth was, no matter how much he wanted to move on, he didn't think he could. The silence between them stretched as Henrik studied their faces, his expression unreadable. The night air carried the distant creak of boats swaying in the harbor, and the cold breeze smelled of salt and damp wood. Lars shifted uncomfortably before speaking. "Then let's go back." Henrik blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What?" Svein nodded, stepping forward. "You say it calls us back? Fine, let's answer. Let's find it again." Henrik let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "You're mad." Lars clenched his fists. "Are we? We've already seen it, survived it, but we don't have proof. No one believes us." He looked out at the dark waters stretching beyond the village. "We need to see it again, to be sure." Svein added, "And this time, we won't just run." Henrik let out a humorless chuckle. "Run? You don't run from the Kraken. It lets you go when it wants to. If you survived, it's because it allowed you to." His gaze hardened. "You want to tempt fate twice?" Lars and Svein exchanged a glance. There was fear in both their eyes, but also something else, determination. "We can prepare better this time," Lars insisted. "Stronger boat, more equipment." We were caught off guard before. Henrik scoffed. And you think being prepared will make a difference? You still don't understand what you're dealing with. Svein folded his arms. Then come with us and make us understand. Henrik stared at them for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. If we do this, if I even consider it, you need to know there's no turning back. Lars felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. We never turned back to begin with, Svein said. Henrik's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked out to sea, as if searching for something. Finally, he muttered, "Give me time to think." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Lars and Svein standing on the docks, the waves whispering against the wooden planks beneath them. Lars and Svein spent the next few days making preparations. Their last journey had nearly cost them their lives, and if they were to return to the sea in search of the Kraken, they had to be ready for anything. They spent long hours reinforcing their boat, checking every plank and nail, ensuring the hull was sturdy enough to withstand the unpredictable waters. They stocked supplies, more food, better ropes, harpoons, extra fuel, and a strong lantern to cut through the heavy mist they knew could descend upon them at any moment. Each night, they waited for Henrik, but he never came. By the third day, Lars was growing impatient. "Maybe he's afraid," he muttered as they sat in the village pub, sipping dark ale. Svein took a slow drink, his eyes fixed on the fire crackling in the corner. "Or maybe he knows something we don't." Lars exhaled sharply. "Either way, we're running out of time. If we don't leave soon, the weather will turn." Svein nodded. "Then we go without him." They returned to the harbor at dawn. The sky was gray, and the wind was picking up, whispering through the ropes of docked boats. Their vessel was ready, packed with everything they could think of. But still, Henrik was nowhere to be seen. As the sun climbed higher, Lars sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That's it then. He's not coming." Svein looked towards the village one last time, hoping against hope. But the cobbled streets remained empty. He nodded. "Let's go." They began untying the ropes, preparing to push off from the dock. The boat rocked slightly beneath them as the tide pulled at it, eager to take them back out to sea. Then, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. They both turned at the same time. Henrik stood at the edge of the dock, dressed in a heavy coat, a bag slung over his shoulder. His expression was grim, but there was something in his eyes. A quiet resignation. "Thought you'd leave without me?" he asked. Lars smirked. "We were starting to think you weren't coming." Henrik stepped onto the boat, setting his bag down. "I almost didn't." He exhaled, looking out towards the open sea. "But if you two fools are really going back out there, I can't let you do it alone." Svein grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. "Then let's do this properly." With Henrik aboard, they pushed off from the dock, their boat drifting out into the endless gray horizon. The hunt for the Kraken had begun again. End of part 2.